The very first thing you have to do when seeing these paintings is Google the term underpainting, because that's the question I get asked all of the time. Is why do you paint the dark red underneath it? Why don't you just paint everything normally? I'll do it right now. I'll Google it. I'll Google underpainting right now. Um, Underpainting, if used correctly, is a great way to unite colour values in the overall painting and add a subjective colour key to the painting. Underpainting is most effective when painted in monochromatic tones. Many artists use darker tones such as burnt sienna, raw umber, or ultramarine blue to achieve the most significant effect. It gives a base to paint on top of, yeah. And because I work quickly, it allows me to leave gaps of like red shadow showing through, whereas if it was just a white canvas I was painting onto, there'd be all these white gaps, which can look all right depending on the type of painting you do, but for the type of painting I do, it's not quite what I'm after. Flesh, I always paint the flesh first in pretty much everything I do. I'm quite a figurative painter, yeah. So I paint a lot of bodies, and flesh is very often the focal point of what I do. So pretty much any painting I do, if it's a portrait or just a single character painting or a comic book page or whatever, I tend to start on the flesh, and that gives sort of sets out the entire piece, and then I just paint everything else around that. I went for quite a mottled Simpsons kind of flesh, slightly yellowy but a bit green and mouldy because he's a zombie. I think I used yellow ochre and a green and some raw umber. Raw umber's a good one because if you add that to any colour, it just dulls it down, so you're not painting with such vibrant colours all of the time. And then highlights. Just add a bit of white to the zombie flesh mix that I made, and add that to the top bits where the light falls, because you're not just painting with colour, you're painting with light, man. I choked a bit, my apologies. I typically do about 2 or 3 layers of highlighting. The more layers of highlighting you do, the sort of smoother and more rendered the thing you're painting will look. But I'm okay with things not being so smooth and well rendered, especially when I'm painting fucking zombies, because they don't need to be smooth and well rendered. Oh, look at that, I bent the thing because it was warping, so I bent it so it was more flat, and now it's got glare from the light which obscures a large part of the painting, so that's really fun and interesting. More highlights, more white added to the thing. That's almost the most difficult part of any painting, is just sort of, especially if it's from imagination, is knowing where the light would fall on a physical object, and thus where you should paint in the highlights. And I don't really have, there's no trick to that. It's just sort of something you've got to figure out, like practice drawing and shading physical shapes. Use references, I guess. And then you sort of learn and figure out what shapes it is that you're drawing and where the light would fall and where you put the highlights on the piece. Sometimes it's easier than others. The hand, it's just like the top of the finger and the thumb gets the highlight, and then you leave pretty much the rest of it in shadow. And you can see the red coming through the paint where I've only used a very sort of thin layer of paint on that hand, for instance. Which does give like a nice sort of like almost blood flesh tone shadow kind of thing showing through. I'm using the highlighting as well to pull out texture in the piece, those forehead creases and things, and little wrinkles and blobs of skin here and there, which you can do with the darker tones, but depending on what sort of look you're going for, you can bring out more and more of those the more you highlight. And again, the more you highlight, the more you render, the more you could bring out in the piece. Bones and skulls! This is always the part that really makes the paintings start to pop. there's certain bits that make the painting pop the more you go, but you get the flesh done and you see, okay, it's this, it's that, it's flesh, cool. But then you start adding in like eyes and teeth and bones and this and that, and it really does start to take shape. A couple of layers of bone colour, raw umber, maybe a burnt umber as well, and some white. I made the teeth a bit more yellowy just so it's not all the same colour, and the eye a bit more white than bone colour. More highlights, apparently. I think that's 4 layers of highlights. Wow. I'm going all out for this one. This is a paid commission, so you know it's worth putting in the effort. Get that drool in there. There's more highlighting to be done. And now it's just repeat that, but for everything else. Oh no, it's not. I lied because I'm a fat liar. I'm putting in some lines. I think only a few for now. Typically, I'll do this at the end. I'll paint in all the colour, and then I think like the second to last thing I'll do is use the dark colours to add in sort of lines and shadows and things. And I think I did these ones here early, just sort of for myself, to give myself an idea that it's working out and the painting's going the way I want it to, and just so I can see the face clearly shining through everything. But there will be more of that later. Dark turquoise, just some greens and blues mixed together, a bit darker, fading a little bit lighter towards the bottom, because I know I'm going to be putting in the green glow underneath everything, so I want it to sort of fade up to darkness to give a nice gradient to the background behind Bartholomew. Adding in greens for the gradient, a gradient of greens, and then some of those into the actual body in preparation for the glow. Which is a couple of yellows, yellow ochre as a base, I think, and then like a lemony yellow, and a bit of green, and some white just to make it bright and shiny. Which it is. It's important to get that glow, not just looking like a lighter green, but to look like a big bright glowy green, like a radioactive glow that would turn people into zombies. And then you're doing just the same thing but backwards for knowing where the light falls from above to do the highlights, and then or lying and making it up and figuring it out where the light might fall, and then doing the same but opposite, figuring out where the light goes from underneath to paint the glow, just on the underside of things to give it a nice underglow, and then some in the background using the thicker brush. I typically use about 3 brushes. This sort of slightly bigger medium brush for larger areas, and then a smaller brush, and then a really small brush for the fine details. Blending in with some slightly darker greens, keeping it, you know, painty and textured. I could do a smooth blend in the background, but for one thing, it doesn't necessarily work. It's not really applicable to have a smooth fade in a zombie picture, and also it's a lot easier to not do it smooth. And you know, this is only a small commission, so I'm not putting in that much effort. The outlines, I like lines, and I like using lines in my paintings. I like the combination of like drawing and painting together almost. This isn't a black, this is a very dark red. It's like maybe I don't know, like 4 or 5 parts black to 1 part red, because it's black ink originally on the drawing with red over it, which gives the black ink a dark red quality. And so if I was to use a black, it would make it a bit too sort of bold and contrasty. So a dark red keeps in colour theme with the rest of the painting. And I like using the lines and adding in little blotches and blobs and hatches and things, little hairs and bits of texture to the piece. a little bit more highlighting, and then the white highlights. That's the very last thing on every painting, is just those white hot spot highlights, which really make it pop. Yeah, that really give a final addition to the form and the texture of the piece as a whole. And that's how we paint a painting. Wow, more of those to come. If you liked it, like the thing, subscribe. I've got a Patreon. Support me on the Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. And watch this space for more.